Welcome to the lecture on physio in sport as part of your AMCPP module. So myself and Matt are going to be taking you through the various components of what this entails. So working as a physio in sport is something that I've done, but something that Matt's done at a much higher level, and he'll be sharing his experiences and I'll be sharing mine. So in terms of your learning outcomes, what we want you to do is appreciate the difference between the National Health Service and being a sports physio. And lots of physios will work in the NHS during the week and then work as a physio at weekends. We want to explore things like injury prevention or almost sort of damage limitation. Can we stop players getting injured? We're going to discover some of the pitch-side physio skills that we might need. We're going to revise acute management of injury at the point of injury, so immediate care. And then we're going to think about when the patient is allowed to return to play or back to training. So in the NHS, you generally don't see acute management of musculoskeletal problems, nor do you see high-end rehabilitation of musculoskeletal problems. This is exclusively the job of sport. So just reminding you about a sport billy, these are the principles of exercise therapy. So we've got adaptation, specificity, progression, regression, overload, reversibility, taking time out, changing behavior, individuality, lifestyle integration, law of diminishing returns, and your responsibility. And in sport, obviously, these are athletes that we're talking about. So this is their job and they take it seriously. So here we've got a comparison between the NHS and professional sport. So the time with patients in the NHS, you're going to get about half an hour, maybe an hour if you're lucky, with your patient. In sport, you could treat your patient daily, 3 times a day is not unusual. The facilities you'll be working in are variable in the NHS. In sport, they would generally be very good settings with some money behind it, depending on what level you're working at. Working hours, Monday to Friday, and then doing your on-call potentially with the NHS. In sport, you're working and on-call 24 hours a day, weekends, weekdays, evenings, even players coming on holiday with you. It's not unusual. So your week is very different in comparison. Consumables, you're very cost restricted in the NHS. In sport, generally you're unlimited, and it really depends on how much money the club you have working for is allowed to spend on this. So types of exercise selection, we're generally dealing with sedentary, maybe semi-elite athletes. I would imagine more weekend warriors. And then if we're in sport, these are elite athletes, so you've got to give them challenging exercises. Stage of recovery, you would generally see subacute and chronic injuries in the NHS, whereas in sport, you're going to see acute all the way up to chronic and just managing chronic injuries. The motivation for both NHS and sport is varied, but generally is going to be higher in sport because this is what they do for a living. This is what pays the mortgage. After 6 to 10 sessions in the NHS, you can discharge your patients. In sport, you can't discharge these patients. They are with you for a long time. So why do people get injured? Why do athletes get injured? Well, there's multiple factors. There's the biological, the physical, the psychological, the sociocultural, and then all of those internal and external factors add up to this sports injury risk profile. And there's lots going on with that. So let's unpack that a bit more. With regard to being a physio in sport, you're going to spend some of your time doing injury prevention. You're also going to be doing pitch side if you work in a team event. You're going to be doing acute rehabilitation. You're going to be doing prehabilitation. This is rehabilitation, or wrong. This is exercise prescription before they have surgery. You're going to be managing persistent injuries as well. And you'll be at various stages of early, mid, and late rehabilitation. So, for example, there's a lot of factors when trying to prevent injury. We've got age, we've got range of movement, we've got previous injuries, somatotypes, all these intrinsic risk factors. And then you've got extrinsic risk factors, the pitch they're playing on, other players, so on and so forth. And then that really determines how susceptible or how robust that athlete is, and also the potential mechanisms of injury. So there's a lot more complexity than we might think to with regard to injury prevention. So American football has a huge amount of injuries. Here you can see the various percentages of injuries, particularly lots of head injuries. And then here is a football player, mostly lower limb injuries, but not exclusively. There's a huge amount of injuries that one player has had. So because they're professional sports people, they tend to sustain more injuries. It's the nature of their game. So we do things like injury prevention screening, and these provide a baseline outcome measure of which to judge our players. So if players are being transferred from one club to another, they have a full medical, including sort of MRI scans, X-rays, cardiograms, the lot, so that people are buying a healthy player. And then there's things that have been around for a long period of time, like the functional movement screen, very popular in the US now, slightly discredited in terms of predicting injury, but still used heavily for screening. And then you've got things like fitness tests as well. So injury prevention is about controlling the controllable and accepting the risk of what we can't control. Multiple factors: age, biomechanics, state of hydration, psychology, the medical team, how good the athlete is at complying with their exercises, the ground conditions. Are they on AstroTurf? Are they in grass? Or are they training on, what training surface are they on? Okay, what type of game are they having? Maybe a bit of luck. Injury history is the biggest factor. Previous injury is the biggest predictor of new injury. And then, of course, traveling, as the clubs do, although not at the moment as much as they would like. So injury screening, as we've come across before, injury screening cannot predict injury because of complexity theory and the human factors. So you can deep dive into those more if you want to. But it's all really about, can we predict injury? And the answer is no, but we can try to minimize those things that are under our control. And ultimately, what gets measured gets managed. So pitchside physio, this is immediate triage as you run onto the pitch. Particularly, you might need to manage the C-spine. If a player has had a head injury or concussion, you might need to do some sort of emergency maneuvers. You might need to do CPR. There's all sorts of things that we need to do with quick and effective medical treatment, and we'll go on to that in the practical session. Acute management, normally all these players go straight in the hydrotherapy pool. They might also use things like the Alter-G, which is an anti-gravity treadmill, and they use things like muscle stimulation, of which the market leader is Compex. So these are toys that are generally not open to the NHS because they're expensive. And we talk about policing the injury. That's prevention, optimal load, because these people don't rest, ice, compression and elevation, although we come on to a new acronym that we're using at the moment. And that is peace and love. Okay, so they keep redoing this. It was ice, then rice, then price, then police. And now the new one is peace and love. So peace is protection, elevation, avoid anti-inflammatories for the first 72 hours at least, then compress the area and then educate the athlete on what's going on. Love is load, optimism, because we've got to deal with the psychology of the athlete, vascularization and exercise. So peace and love is currently being touted by the Twitterati out there as the new expression of what to say. Reminding you about our stages of healing. Obviously, we've got hematoma, okay, the bleeding stage, inflammation, proliferation, and then remodeling, and just reminding you about how long this is going to take for different structures and different age groups. So how do we measure the exercise? Everything that these athletes do gets recorded in terms of their volume, their sets and reps, the frequency, the intensity, even down to the amount of contacts they do when it comes to plyometrics, how much they lift as a percentage of their body weight, the distance they might cover on the pitch, and that is done via GPS that is also correlated with heart rate, the time they're exercising, the Borg or rate of perceived exertion, and then we've got things like the visual analog scale, and then this is effectively the acute chronic workload. What we're doing when we're measuring training impetus is the rate of perceived exertion and the time they've been under that rate of perceived exertion. So, for example, playing a match might be 9 out of 10 rate of perceived exertion, and that would obviously be 90 minutes for football, 80 minutes for rugby. So we talked about the specialised equipment. So there's going to be lots of different things that you see in sport and lots of different ways of doing things. So sometimes you'll get your athlete to effectively just do some active recovery, but they never generally rest, although they might do some deep relaxation with them as well. So lots of toys that we use, blood restriction, hypertrophy, agility drills, as we've covered, things like the Alter G, hydrotherapy, muscle stim, all sorts of things that are very different from the way we do business in the NHS. Knowledge of strength and conditioning. You've got to know your Romanian deadlift, okay, from your Bulgarian split squat or your goblet squat, okay. This is the language of strength and conditioning, and it's important to have a background in strength and conditioning. Just knowing the terms, you don't have to do them, but you do have to know what they are, and then you have to know what exercises to select. Are they going to be on the Smith machine? Are they going to be doing some isolated open chain exercises, or are they going to be using cables? So you've got to be able to select what's going on, as that's important. Things like plyometrics, counting the number of plyos is massively important. Tendinopathies of the Achilles and the patella tendon are just massively common, and then you've got to potentially manage that load on top of what you're doing. So here is an example, week 3 of 6 of an ankle inversion, about the various sessions that they might do: proprioception, plyo, muscle exercises for the lower limb, then some mobility and flexibility, bit of midline stabilization, and then obviously keeping themselves fit with some cardiovascular exercise. So thinking about all those things as well as maintaining their fitness. We've got to think about the psychology of injury. These people, their esteem is linked to their psychology and their teammates. This is what they do for a living. So we must be mindful of the psychology of these athletes. Then we've also got to think about the multifactorial nature of what we do. We've got to be very analytical. We've got to think about the entire kinetic chain and taking these low-level exercises all the way up to more complex exercises. So you're going to be doing these 3 case studies: the hamstrings case study, cervical spine, and the ACL, and you've already covered those as well. We're going to be doing those in much more detail in the practical, so look forward to seeing you in the practical. Thanks very much for watching.